Jenin, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Rudaw Amro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, let's start with the weather, the hot weather in Iraq and in Kurdistan. Which one is more hard for you, the hot weather or the hot political situation in the country?
Well, the hot political situation obviously interests me a lot, and the hot weather is bothering me sometimes. But it goes hand in hand with Iraq and the Kurdistan region, so I'm getting used to it.
Okay, so one of the hottest subjects in Iraq is the elections in October. First of all, do you believe the elections are going to take place?
Well, the election date has been announced a while ago, on October 10, and the UN, the United Nations, we can only work on the assumption that the elections will take place on October 10. In my view, it is important that these elections will take place. It was a central demand of the people. Marcia here referred to it, many others. So there are very good reasons to hold these elections in time. And this is what we are trying to do. At least we are not conducting the elections. We're trying to assist and to make sure that the elections will take place in a credible and transparent way.
And do you think the conditions in Iraq right now is suitable conditions for the elections to take place? The UK ambassador to Iraq told Rudaw, it was in one of these studios, that the case in Iraq, the situation in Iraq is not a perfect situation for elections to take place.
You are referring to the previous ambassador. He left the country.
Yeah.
But Stephen, I know him well. I asked him about his remarks because I said this is actually very dangerous because the security environment in Iraq is a very fragile one. And he said it was not my intention to suggest to postpone or delay the elections because of the security environment, but to emphasize the importance of accountability. And this is, of course, that I wholeheartedly agree with because the lack of accountability is a big issue in Iraq. But the security environment is fragile, was fragile, if you look at previous elections. So a fragile security environment is unfortunately nothing new for Iraq.
So you say, in any case, this election should take place because this is important for the future of Iraq?
Well, in any case, this is but what I'm saying, it's of the greatest importance that credible elections take place in time to make sure that Iraq can move beyond the elections to implement reforms and to get things done.
And that should be on time?
That should be on time.
Okay. The role of UNAMI in this election. Iraq has called UNAMI to play a major role in observation and inspecting these elections, but are you happy with the role that UNAMI is going to play? Because I know, do you have enough resources to be able to observe the election in 19 provinces, including Halabja as the 19th province, 19 provinces of Iraq?
Look, the United Nations has a significant electoral assistance team assisting the authorities, including IHEC, the Independent High Electoral Commission, to organize the elections in the in a very transparent and credible way. This is what we're doing as we speak, and it is, if you look worldwide, it is maybe the biggest electoral assistance project the UN is conducting. On top of that, the Security Council decided to also task UNAMI with the deployment of electoral observers in advance and on election day to make sure that elections will take place in the way it was intended and spelled out in the electoral law.
So with the resources you have here in Iraq and with the program you mentioned, can you make the Iraqis sure that the elections which is going to take place in October are elections free of fraud and they are elections to be dependent on?
Look, like it or not, because I know many people get a bit nervous if I say this, but the United Nations is not running the country. We do not have executive powers. So elections are Iraqi-owned and Iraqi-led. Iraq is a sovereign state. But we are there to assist and to provide our good offices and to observe.
How about observe?
Wait, and to observe, meaning that I cannot predict whether the elections will take place without fraud. What I do know is that right now all our efforts, but also the efforts of many Iraqi authorities, are focused on, preventing fraud and to make sure that the elections indeed will take place in the most credible way. But we will only know on election day or after election day whether this is indeed the case.
My question is specifically this. After the election day, if you observe that there is a big fraud in the elections, what would you do?
Wait and see.
Wait and see?
The world is watching. Yeah.
The world is watching. So let's wait and see. Let's shift to the recent drone attacks on Erbil, rocket attacks on the American troops in Baghdad, in other areas of Iraq. First of all, there is a serious threat against civilian people in Erbil and in other parts of Iraq. And these groups, these militia groups, a part of them operate under the flag of Hashd al-Sha'bi. Some of them say they are not a part of Hashd al-Sha'bi, but in some cases, Kurdistan region of Iraq has reported to the Iraqi government the links of these groups. What's your role as UNAMI to provide the stability both for Kurdistan and Iraq when it comes to the threats which these uncontrolled militias pose?
I think this is the best descriptions, the latter, because we are talking about armed groups operating outside state control, armed groups operating against the state of Iraq, not only with attacks in Erbil, but with attacks throughout Iraq. And unfortunately, you and I will agree that these attacks are a constant in Iraqi life, putting a lot at risk, actually pushing the country into the unknown, because if the attacks continue, you can expect sooner or later, as we have seen already, counterattacks. And what does it bring us? A vicious circle of more violence, more loss of life, livelihoods. I mean, this is really dangerous and putting a lot at risk. So we can only urge authorities to make sure that armed groups and perpetrators of these attacks, that they are identified and that they're being held accountable.
So you want to tell me there is a distinguishment between Hashd al-Sha'bi groups, which you think they are legitimate?
Look, I don't think that if you go back in time with how Hashd al-Sha'bi PMF became part of the national security architecture of Iraq, it's a bit too complicated to do this in an interview like this. But what we do see,
talking about today.
No, what we do see is that we have in Iraq armed groups operating outside state control with wings inside state institutions and outside state institutions. So if we go back to what is happening here, we talk about armed groups operating outside state control.
Outside state control. Do you consider these as terrorist groups?
I mean, no attack can be justified. So why would you try to create this environment of fear and intimidation? Why would you do it? So terrorist group, I mean, terrorist is a very broad definition of many other things as well. But I mean, to any attack, let me rephrase this, no attack can be justified. And yes, anyone who thinks that he should attack a diplomatic mission or innocent civilians is, in my view, a terrorist. Yeah, sure.
Okay. What actions should be taken against these groups?
What do you
internationally mean? Do you think, for example, the international coalition has a role to play against these groups?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
The question is, what actions should be taken against these uncontrolled armed groups in Iraq? Is there a role for the international coalition to play?
No. You know, it's time for Iraq to get back on its own feet and to make sure that they find and identify the perpetrators and to hold them to account. This is Iraqi business. And of course, I mean, international presence, being UN or any other organization, it's at the invitation of the Iraqi government, and we can only assist and provide our good offices. So what I'm saying is that we, or Iraq in fact, should not allow arms to be used outside the control of the state, and this is exactly the problem. This is not something that the international community can resolve for the whole of Iraq. This is something that the Iraqi authorities will have to deal with.
But these uncontrolled groups also pose threat to the international missions in Iraq.
Yes. So, look, you're trying to force me to go into a certain direction. But what I said, the constant or the attacks are constant, and they lead, as you have seen, to counterattacks. And this is a very dangerous vicious circle that again would lead to lots of violence in Iraq. So what I'm saying is no attack, can be justified under whatever circumstances, be it to diplomatic missions, but also, I mean, more important, to innocent civilians.
After the US troops withdrew from Afghanistan, there is this feeling among the people in Iraq, also in Kurdistan, that the US troops may also withdraw from Iraq. And it's not only the US troops, it's the troops which operate under the international coalition against ISIS. There is a legislation by the Iraqi parliament which...
A resolution.
Yeah, a resolution which tells the foreign troops to leave the country. Do you see this as enough legal ground for the international coalition against ISIS to leave the country?
First of all, this is no business for the UN. Iraq is a sovereign country, so Iraq and the Iraqi authorities are perfectly able to decide themselves who they want to invite to be present in their country and when and how they would like to receive assistance from the international community, be it the United Nations or be it the international coalition in the fight against Daesh. So I think it's fair to say that the Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi will go to Washington, D.C. very soon, and that we will have to wait what he will discuss in Washington, D.C. with the American counterparts. But at the same time, I think the Iraqi authorities made it clear that there are some areas in which they, they could really use some assistance, and that is different from having combat troops present throughout your country, but it's not black and white. There are more nuances in this debate.
So do you think the experience which Afghanistan is going through today may Iraq go through in a near future?
I think it's not very wise to compare Iraq and Afghanistan. Surely there are some similarities, but they're very different countries with its own background and history.
I see. And do you think a probable withdrawal of Americans and the coalition against ISIS, what will it have? What's going to be the impact of this withdrawal in the fight against ISIS?
Well, it's not up to me to comment on a withdrawal or a potential withdrawal. Let us wait what will happen within the context of the strategic dialogue. What I do know is that the Iraqi authorities made it clear time and again that in certain areas, for example, aerial support, they will need continued assistance from the international coalition. Secondly, Daesh is still a problem. I mean, they do not have, as we saw a few years ago, they do not occupy a territory, but they are still there and still able to launch attacks. And their ideology is still out there. So we should not be naive in the risk that Daesh is still posing.
And do you urge the international coalition to still play a role against ISIS in Iraq and Syria?
No, honestly, this is not up to the UN. I cannot emphasize it enough because everybody's all the time talking about Iraq as a sovereign state, and rightly so. This is Iraqi business, and it's up to the Iraqi authorities, including the Kurdistan authorities, to deal with it. No, because what I'm saying is, look, I have an opinion on the risk that Daesh is still, posing to all of us. And if we do not take care of that risk, if we do not mitigate the risks, then obviously it will not only create problems for Iraq or for the region, but even far beyond. So it is something that is part of an international debate. But how and when and what are the means to address this in Iraq is up to the Iraqis, obviously in a dialogue with the international coalition and the United States of America.
Okay, let's move on the conflict between Turkey and PKK. It's been like 40 years, this conflict continues, and Turkey is conducting operations inside Iraq. What's your view about these conflicts, which causes civilian casualties in Iraq, and also like villages are evacuated?
Well, also here, you know, whatever conflict there is, but if there is use of violence and the loss of lives, livelihood, and an increase in, for example, IDPs, then really one should think twice. So dialogue, violence is not a solution, never. So dialogue is the only way forward, and hence it is important that Iraqi Kurdish authorities continue their dialogue with the Turkish authorities.
But the conflict is not between KRG and Turkey.
No, but I said it many times. I think you are very aware of that. Is that Iraq should not be used as an arena for different power competitions. Unfortunately, it is the case often that we see Iraq as a theater, not for reconciliation, not for a strong negotiation partner, but indeed as an arena for different power competition.
The Constitution of Iraq, Article number 140.
Yeah.
UNAMI used to play a role years ago in implementation of this article. Do you still have a mission in implementation of this article of the Iraqi Constitution?
Well, this is a very essential article, 140, and we had many debates about 140 between Kurdish and federal authorities, but also within the UN. I think, there are so many outstanding issues, and I'm in the country now for almost 3 years, and what I observed is between Baghdad and Erbil is this ad hoc compromise mode. So whenever there's a problem, there's turmoil, they're followed by negotiations, and there is this ad hoc compromise. What will happen next is that you will, the consequence thereof is that you will not be able to find long-lasting solutions. So I called many times for this structured, institutionalized, regular dialogue between the two capitals to make sure that you will be able to identify solutions for a number of issues, including the budget, including revenue sharing, including Article 140. The good news is that I am aware of the fact that both Prime Ministers, so Mustafa Al-Kadhimi, but also Prime Minister Masroor Barzani, are in favor of such an institutionalized dialogue. The question is, when, how, and what the timing is for a very first meeting. But I think it's essential and fundamental to get this institutionalized dialogue going to address many issues, including Article 140.
And UNAMI, as UNAMI, do you observe the current situation on ground in the disputed areas? Because there are reports which suggest there is Arabization in these areas, like local people are removed from their towns, and people from other parts of Iraq are brought here. Do you observe what's going on the ground?
We do not have eyes and ears on the ground like everywhere, but of course we follow the developments and we see what's happening, and we also are aware of the many accusations going back and forth. So yes, we are in the loop.
And do you confirm any of these reports?
You know what, we have been negotiating, for example, with regards to Kirkuk for quite a bit now. Unfortunately, components have not yet been able to reach an agreement. But if you want to, it's the same like what you just did with your referring to Turkey, PKK, Iraq, and you want to identify and to accuse a party of being the bad boy or being the bad party, of being the bad guy.
But the
however,
if there is humanitarian crisis
you
in
should
a place,
also listen to me.
Yeah, okay.
Then that is obviously very tempting, but it's not bringing you or me any solution. So it's more important is to bring them together, to get the dialogue, and to work on a long-lasting solution.
I see. My point is just that there are humanitarian crises in the area. Like people are killed because of these conflicts. People have to leave their villages. That's why, and
but this is terrible, you know, and I'm the one calling for respect for integrity and so on and so on. But you have to understand that it's more complex. It's very tempting, also for me, to make a situation black and white. But between black and white, there are 50 shades of gray.
Let's move on to the oil production. Oil production of KRG has been disputes between Erbil and Baghdad. Not only the oil operations of Kurdistan region, but also the relative articles in the Iraqi constitution. KRG has a different understanding on the constitution, and the Iraqi government has a different one. Even the federal government, the federal court could not make a ruling about this dispute. But there is the budget bill of 2021 passed in the Iraqi parliament. Do you think this dispute is ended by this law? This law put an end to the legitimacy
of the Kurdish? No, I'm not optimistic. I mean, I have to be honest about that. This is, I'm not very optimistic. And this is exactly, has everything to do with what I just explained. If you do not have a institutionalized, structured, regular dialogue between the two capitals to find sustainable solutions for budget, revenue sharing, Article 140 and so on, then you will, in fact, witness a few more years of constant crisis management. But again, at the same time, I'm also hopeful because we have two prime ministers, Masroor Barzani and Mustafa Al-Kadhimi, who actually said we should address that lack or the absence of this institutionalized dialogue. Let's work on it. But it's not there yet. So I'm desperately waiting for a first meeting of the two capitals to get things going and to address the outstanding issues in a more structured way.
This law is enough ground, legal ground for the Kurdish oil operation?
Look, let me not comment in detail on the Kurdish oil operation. Where there is an agreement, it takes two to tango, right? So in this case, Erbil and Baghdad. What we have seen in the past is that they would reach a deal, but at the end of the day, it would not be implemented. So implementation will prove essential. Let's see. The first budget has been,
you told me you're hopeful about this meeting between the two prime ministers. Yeah. So is there any date which tells that?
No. Otherwise, I would have told you. No, what I'm saying is they appreciate the idea. They embraced the fact that this is indeed the way forward, to move away from constant crisis management and to move towards an institutionalized dialogue. And now we have to make that happen.
My last subject, in fact, two last subjects. The first one is going to be about the freedom of speech in Kurdistan region.
Yes.
What do you think? Do you think freedom of expression in Kurdistan region of Iraq is in danger?
Well, if you look at the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech in Iraq, including in the Kurdistan region, then I think it's fair to say that we really would like to see some improvements. That although it's written down in a constitution, whether it's embraced in all kind of rules and regulations, does not mean that there are no parties or authorities or individuals who are trying to limit the freedom of speech and expression. While I have to emphasize the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression is essential, fundamental in a democracy. So, in any democracy, you will face, many diverse opinions. And as a former politician and minister, I know all about how difficult it is if you're all the time being criticized for what you do or what you do not do. But at the end of the day, you should see it as the perfect opportunity to once again explain your policy or to once again explain your point of view. This is with regards to authorities, but there are also many other parties who play a role in Iraq in trying to silence people or trying to intimidate people. So this environment of fear that is out there, for example, with the Tishreen protests and the activists, the abductions, the assassinations, I mean, it's all part of trying to limit the freedom of speech and expression.
And do you have conversations with the KRG in regard to this freedom of speech?
Yeah, actually we have an ongoing dialogue, and it's a very open dialogue. And we hope to see that some improvements in the next months.
There are these rulings made by courts in Kurdistan region of Iraq against the Hope convicts. Do you find these rulings as legitimate rulings?
It's not. I mean, it's always also in a democracy. It's dangerous to comment on a ruling because the judge and the court are independent. But we have been observing the trials, and we have been clear about our findings. So you can most likely picture that I was not happy with the outcome.
You are concerned as well with the judicial system in Kurdistan region. So do you think this issue that you say the outcome is not what we have been looking for, what does it have with the judiciary system in Kurdistan, and what sort of reform you suggest for judiciary system?
No, the good thing, I mean, and I have to say, this is the good thing, although I'm not happy and with the outcome and what happens, I have to say that the ongoing dialogue is a constructive one and an open one, meaning that there is also a side, the Kurdish authorities, Kurdistan region authorities also indicated that they are open for advice, good offices and assistance and training, also with regards to the Kurdistan region judicial system.
My final question is going to be about the unification of Peshmerga. You emphasized about the importance of Peshmerga unification. And under the current situation in Kurdistan, do you see such a unification feasible?
Well, the good news is that many people within the Peshmerga, so the Peshmerga themselves, are most of the time very much in favor of this unification and are ready to work towards it. They are working towards it. But politically, it's a bit more difficult because of certain issues within parties and between parties. So I think that it's not going to be an easy ride, but it's the only way forward, because the Kurdistan region cannot continue to be divided in two, and cannot continue with governments, armed forces, divided by two.
Remember last time we talked about the unification of Peshmerga forces. It was during the debate organized about the Constitution of Kurdistan, and you had a speech there. You told me that the two parties should come together and talk about this, and the political parties should come to understanding this division should be ended. Do you see that this division from that day up to today, there is any sort of improvement in ending this division, or do you see much more division, not even between two parties, but within the parties?
Well, recent developments are not, obviously we can refer to developments within parties. But you know what? Sometimes you wake up, and I think you might feel the same, is that you go like the glass is half full, there's hope, and we're moving forward in the right direction. And then something happens, and you go 2 steps back, and you look at your glass and you think, my God, it's just not half full, it's really empty. So it's with ups and downs. As I said, it's not going to be an easy ride, but it must be understood by any authority and by any party that this is the only way forward. And also, it must be well understood that this is essential for having, for protecting the rights and freedoms you enjoy right now.
Hennis-Plasschaert, thank you very much for joining us here at Rudaw.
You're most welcome.